Dear people watching and listening, Assalamu alaikum. Kindly like and share this video and subscribe to my YouTube channel. Kindly support my channel by contributing to my Patreon account so that I can continue making such audiobooks for you. The Muslim Conquest of Persia by Lieutenant General A.I. Akram. This book tells in detail about the Arab conquest of Persia, also known as the Arab conquest of Iran, during the Rashidun Caliphate from 633 to 654 AD. This conquest brought the fall of the Sassanid Empire, which was in power for over 4 centuries, while rivaling its neighbor, the Eastern Roman Empire of Byzantine. Start of Chapter 16. The Conquest of Ahwaz. The year 17 Hijri, corresponding generally to 638 AD, was for the most part a year of consolidation. However, while there was quiet on the northeastern front, where the Persian army had withdrawn after the loss of Hulwan, the Muslims found it necessary to launch 2 operations, one to the northwest and the other to the southeast. The first was a diversion designed to reduce pressure on the Muslims in Syria, and the second a limited tactical action which was meant to deal with the pinprick started by the Persian general Hormuzan, but which led in the course of things to the conquest of Ahwaz. We shall take the diversionary operation first. In August 636 was fought the bloody Battle of Yarmouk, in which Khalid broke the back of a vast Roman army. Following this victory, the Muslims recaptured Damascus and then laid siege to Jerusalem. The Holy City surrendered in April 637, and thereafter Abu Ubaidah and Khalid advanced into northern Syria, taking city after city, until they got to the famous metropolis of Antioch, where the Romans made their last determined stand in Syria. Here too the Romans were trounced, and after quickly clearing up the few cities that remained, Abu Ubaidah settled down in military occupation of Syria, with his headquarters at Emesa. Heraclius, the Byzantine emperor, had left Syria even before the Battle of Antioch, knowing that the chances of holding this lovely province against the all-conquering Muslim army were slim. Departing northwards, he had taken one last sorrowing look at Syria and lamented, "Salutations to thee, O Syria, and farewell from one who departs. Never again shall the Roman return to thee except in fear. Oh, what a fine land I leave to the enemy." But to keep the Muslims occupied in Syria and dissuade them from following up their conquests, B instigated the Christian Arab tribes of the Jazira to make an attempt to recover Syria. As explained earlier, the Jazira was the land between the Tigris and the Euphrates, in what is now northwestern Iraq, northeastern Syria, and southeastern Turkey. These tribes, bound to Heraclius by bonds of religion, responded bravely to the call and gathering in their thousands, marched to Emesa in the midsummer of 638. As soon as Abu Ubaid heard of the preparations being made in the Jazira against him, he concentrated his army to fight a defensive battle in the fortified city of Emesa, and asked Umar for reinforcements. Umar ordered Saad to send Kaka bin Amr with 4,000 men from Kufa to join Abu Ubaidah, and also instructed him to launch a 3-pronged invasion of the Jazira from Iraq under Suhail bin Adi, Abdullah bin Utbah, and Walid bin Utbah, with Ayaz bin Ghanam as overall commander of the invasion force. The Christian Arabs of the Jazeera arrived at Emesa to find the Muslims securely fortified. They laid siege to the city, but hardly had the siege begun when messengers came galloping from the Jazeera to inform them that 3 Muslim columns were approaching their land from Iraq. The Arabs realized the absurdity of their situation. While they were fighting in Syria, pulling Heraclius's chestnuts out of the fire for him, their own land was about to fall to the Muslims coming from another direction. They raised the siege and hastened back to their homes, which was the only sensible thing to do. The Muslims came out of Emesa and redisposed themselves in occupation of Syria. The 3 Muslim columns invading the Jazeera stopped when they heard of the return of the Christian Arabs, and soon after were withdrawn to Iraq by order of Umar, who did not wish to get involved in a major campaign beyond Iraq and Syria at this stage. Kaka arrived at Emesa with his 4,000 warriors 2 days after the departure of the Arabs, but a little later was recalled to Iraq. However, Abu Ubaidah asked the Caliph to let him have Ayaz bin Ghanam for the Syrian theatre, and thus General was duly transferred from Iraq to work under Abu Ubaidah, and was used by Abu Ubaidah for raids into what is now southern Turkey. The diversionary move had worked brilliantly and achieved all that it was intended to achieve. The Muslims in Iraq would not hereafter have to worry about the Jazeera, or go to the aid of their brothers in Syria. During the following year and the year following that is 18 and 19 Hijri, Ayaz bin Ghanam invaded the Jazeera from the Syrian side and conquered all of it as far north as Amid, the present Diyarbakir. And in 20 Hijri, Ayaz died in the Jazeera. Hormuzan, veteran of Qadisiyah, had remained with the survivors of the Persian army in their retreat to Ctesiphon. After the Persians were again defeated at Babylon by Sa'd during his advance to the Persian capital, Hormuzan and his followers detached themselves from the main body of the Persian army and traveled to Ahwaz, of which he was governor and prince. Here he set about gathering forces for another trial of strength with the Muslims. There were 7 families in Persia which formed the higher tier of the nobility of the land, and stood second in rank only to the royal family. Each of these families had a feudal overlordship over a region of Persia, a kind of duchy or princedom, and one of these families was headed by Hormuzan. His region consisted of Ahwaz, the province now known as Rozistan, and the district of Mehirjan Qazaf, which lay in the southern foothills of the upper part of the Zagros Mountains, southeast of Hulwan. The main city of Mehirjan Qazaf was Saimara, where Hormuzan had a ducal palace, but the city of Ahwaz was a bigger and more important place, and it was here that Hormuzan directed his energies towards continuing the war with the Muslims. Sometime after his arrival at Ahwaz, he began to send raiding parties into the Suwad. The weight of these raids fell mainly on the local Arabs and Persians, and Hormuzan failed to consider what would happen to him once the wrath of the Muslims was aroused. But he went on with his raids in the belief that he was hurting the new Muslim state of Iraq. One of these raids was led by his son Azin, who was captured and killed by Zarar bin al-Khattab, as described in the last chapter. After the death of Azin, the raids were confined to the southern part of the Suwad, mainly the districts of Maysan and Dast Maysan, which lay astride the Tigris north of Uballa, and for these raids Hormuzan formed 2 bases, a little forward of Ahwaz, one by the river Tiri and the other at Manazir, both of which were districts of Ahwaz. Maysan and Tast Maysan, the districts afflicted by the Persian raids, fell under the jurisdiction of Utbah bin Ghazwan, governor of Basra. Utbah had brought from Ctesiphon only 800 men, and finding this force insufficient to repulse or discourage the raids, he appealed to Saad for help. Saad sent a force of unknown strength under Nu'man bin Muqarrin, with instructions to place himself opposite the Tiri and await the orders of Utbah. Meanwhile, Utbah was about to recruit more warriors from among the local Arabs who had been converted to Islam, and pushed a force forward from Basra to position itself in front of the Persians at Manazir. This force was under the command of a companion named Salma bin al-Qan, and this happened in late 17 Hijri, about Shawwal, that is October or November of 638. Noman and Salma, having established their camps in front of the two Persian bases, agreed upon a coordinated plan of attack, making full use of speed and surprise to capture the Persian bases. Consequently, a simultaneous attack was launched, and Hormuzan's army positioned at the bases was defeated and driven back. The Persian withdrew his troops to Ahwaz and deployed them in the city along the left bank of the river Karun. The Muslim detachments, the Kufans under Noman and the Basrans under Salma, followed the retreating Persians and secured the right bank of the Karun. The two forces then stood and glared at each other across the river, each safe on its own bank. Hormuzan was thoroughly shaken by the action at the Tiri and Manazir and feared for Ahwaz. He did not yet have a sufficiently large force to engage in a major battle with the Muslims. But he was a wily general and decided to play for time and postpone a showdown until he was prepared for it. He sent word to the Muslim generals on the West Bank that he wished to make peace. This led to an exchange with Utbah, and a treaty was signed with Hormuzan, whereby his entire princedom of Ahwaz and Mihirjan Qazaf would come under Muslim rule and would pay the jizya and other taxes, though governed by Hormuzan and not occupied by the Muslims. The part of Ahwaz already in Muslim hands, however, was outside the scope of this treaty because it had been taken by the sword and would remain under direct military rule. Salma took over the administration of the district of Manazir, and a Muslim officer named Hurmila was placed at the river Tiri. In the province of Basra, there would be no further military action during what remained of the year 17 Hijri, and the year would end peacefully, except for a Muslim named Ula bin al-Hadrami, who pushed the Muslims into an adventure which can best be described as the fiasco of Fars. Fars was the Persian province lying southeast of Rozistan, south of Isfahan, and west of Kirman. Ula, originally an inhabitant of Hadramaut, was quite an important companion. During the apostasy, Caliph Abu Bakr had appointed him to command an independent corps and charged him with the mission of destroying the apostasy and re-establishing Islam in Bahrain. This task he effectively completed towards the end of 11 Hijri, and thereafter the Arabs in Bahrain remained true to Islam. Peace prevailed in the province with Ula as its governor. When Umar assumed the caliphate, he confirmed Ula at his post, later removed him from the appointment, and placed another man as governor, but still later dismissed that other man and reinstated Ula as governor of Bahrain. There was nothing wrong with Ula bin al-Hadrami, except that he did not like Sa'd bin Abi Waqqas. There had been trouble between the two during the apostasy, and Ula thereafter held a grudge against Sa'd. Then as Sa'd became the commander-in-chief in Iraq, and went on from victory to victory, defeating the great Persian host at Qadisiyah and taking Ctesiphon, Jalola, Tikrit, etc., the fire of Ula's resentment and envy began to burn more fiercely. His own province of Bahrain was a military backwater. Nothing ever happened here, and no glory came to the lot of those who had to live in the province. So Ula began to get impatient to do something big in the war against Persia, and win fame as a general. He would show Sa'd. The trouble was that there was no enemy in Bahrain. The nearest enemy was in the Persian province of Fars, across the Persian Gulf from Bahrain, and if he wanted to fight Persians on his own, he would have to get to Fars. And this could not be done without disobeying the Caliph, who had given very clear orders that no attempt would be made to cross the Persian Gulf. Umar was a much feared ruler, and dread of what Umar would do to him if he disobeyed the master held Ula in check for some time. But at last the desire for fame and envy of Sa'd got the better of him, and he made up his mind to cross the Gulf and do battle with the Persians, Umar's instructions notwithstanding. He called the local Arabs to arms, and they responded eagerly to the call. Sufficient numbers came forward for Ula to form 3 large regiments, which were placed under the command of Jarud bin Mualla, Sawar bin Hammam, and Khulaid bin Munzir, with the latter also acting as force commander. This force was transported in sea-going vessels across the Gulf by order of Ula. What its exact geographical objective was is not known. The Muslims landed upon the coast of Fars and advanced in the direction of Persepolis, which may have been the objective of the campaign, but had only gone as far as Taus when they found their way barred by a sizable Persian force consisting of the inhabitants of Persepolis, who had been led out to battle by their high priest. Taus, also known as the Waj, was in the plain a few miles north of the present Rozistan, just before the hills began. As the Muslims stopped to take stock of the situation and prepare for battle, the high priest sent a fast detachment around their flank to get to the coast and destroy the vessels which had brought them across the sea. Khulaid prepared for battle. He made a long speech, embellished with Quranic verses, which fired the spirits of the Muslims, and soon after midday, a hard battle began. During the early stages of the battle, 2 Muslim regimental commanders, Sawar and Jarud, who had thrown themselves fiercely at the Persians, were killed. Their regiments were taken over by their sons, Abdullah bin Sawar and Munzir bin Jarud, and these young lions, following in their father's footsteps, also died a glorious death in combat. Then Khulaid took personal command of the 3 regiments and conducted the battle very skillfully, with the result that by sunset the Persians had been defeated and driven from the battle. As a battle, this was a gallant show, and many of the Muslims, including 2 regimental commanders and their sons, came to a noble end. But as a military campaign it was stupid, pointless, futile. After burying his dead, Khulaid led his men to the coast, only to find his boats burned. He changed his direction and started on the coastal road towards Basra, but when he arrived near Qub, a small coastal town, he found a Persian force blocking his path, a force too large for his weary soldiers to overcome. Khulad at once went into camp and prepared for a defensive action. Opposing him was Shahrak, governor of Fars, and Shahrak was determined to wipe out the Muslims, being encouraged in his resolve by the knowledge that the Muslims were cut off from all aid and from escape. He launched several attacks on the Muslim camp, but was beaten off every time. The courage of the Muslims was hardened by desperation, and the Persians could make no dent in the Muslim defense. After a few unsuccessful attempts, Shahrak withheld his attacks and began to wait for Muslim supplies to run out. Meanwhile, Khulad had been able to find a boat of some sort and a messenger to the Caliph to inform him of the plight of the Muslims in Fars. Umar's aversion to water obstacles has already been mentioned. He did not trust water and resisted all attempts by his generals to go across the sea to farther territories. 3 years later, in 20 Hijri, he would give permission for a naval operation against the Romans, and a force was transported in 20 vessels from North Syrian coast towards some objective in Rome, probably the south coast of what is now Turkey. But the entire force, boat and man, which was under an officer named Alqama bin Mujazziz, came to grief, and Umar wished he had stuck his earlier resolve against seaborne operations. He swore that this would never happen again. So now when he heard of the fate of the Muslims in Fars, the Caliph's anger knew no bounds. He at once wrote to Utbah bin Ghazwan and urged him to raise a large force from Basra and dispatch it immediately to Fars to extricate the Muslims. Utbah lost no time in carrying out the Caliph's orders and soon had a force ready for action, whose strength is given by Tabari as 12,000, but was probably rather less than that. It contained stalwarts like Asim bin Amr and was placed under Abu Sabra bin Abi Ruhm, and moved by forced marches to Fars, riding mules and leading the horses. As a result of their treaty with Hormuzan, the Muslims felt no danger from the Persian force on their flank as they moved along the coastal route, though this security was due not so much to Hormuzan's intentions as to his inability to interfere with the Muslims. As Abu Sabra arrived near Ghub, a large Persian reinforcement also appeared from the interior of Fars to join Shahrak. In fact, the Muslim relief column was not a day too early. Both Muslim groups of Abu Sabra and Khulaid promptly attacked the Persians, who were so surprised and unbalanced by the arrival of the relief column from Basra that they were glad to break contact and get away. The Muslims then marched back to Basra and arrived there after an uneventful journey. As for Ula bin al-Hadrami, he was forthwith dismissed from his post, and as punishment for his folly and his disobedience of orders, sent to serve under Sa'd bin Abi Waqqas. Soon after the fiasco of Fars, Utbah bin Ghazwan left Basra to visit Medina in about Zulqa'dah, that is December or January. His purpose was the annual pilgrimage to Mecca, but while at Medina he complained to the Caliph about the harsh treatment which he had received from Sa'd while under his command. Umar did not accept the complaint as legitimate, whereupon Utbah tendered his resignation, but this too was rejected by the Caliph. Utbah had to return to his post at Basra, and as ill luck would have it, fell off his camel on the way and died from the fall. Before leaving Basra, he had left Mughira bin Shoba as his deputy in charge of peace and war. Upon the death of Utbah, the Caliph confirmed Mughira at his post, and the latter took full command of the forces in his theatre and the administration of the districts in his region. Mention has been made in several preceding chapters of Mughira bin Shu'bah, an able general, a brave fighter and a very cunning man. He had become a Muslim in 6 Hijri. He was from the tribe of Saqif which lived in Taif, had taken part in several battles, including the great Battle of Yamama in which Khalid had defeated the redoubtable apostate chief, Musaylima the liar. Mughira was the most colorful of the several emissaries who had parleyed with Rustam on the eve of Qadisiyah, so Mughira became governor of Basra. One of the infamous incidents cited in the history books is when he was charged with adultery. This happened soon after he was appointed a governor. The lady in question was one named Jamil, and the event in question was seen by 4 men, the legal minimum number of witnesses required by Quranic law in such offences. The matter was duly reported to the Caliph, who decided to take normal legal action in the matter. Umar appointed as governor of Basra a man named Abu Musa, a companion and general who was destined to make important military conquests, as described later in this book. He was ordered to take over the province and sent Mughira to Medina for trial, along with the witnesses. Abu Musa traveled from Medina to Basra, took charge of his post, informed Mughira of his dismissal, and dispatched him and the witnesses to Medina. It appears that Umar himself acted as judge at the trial. Mughira pleaded not guilty, taking the stand that the lady was his own wife. The witnesses were called to give evidence. The first 3 made definite statements about the event and identified the woman, but just as the 4th man, one named Ziyad, was called up to make his statement, Umar remarked, "I see the face of a man by whose evidence I hope Allah will not disgrace a companion of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, on whom be the blessings of Allah and peace." Ziyad declared in his statement that while he had seen the event, he had not seen the face of the woman and did not know who she was. Since the minimum of 4 witnesses could not be counted to give evidence against Mughira, the accused was acquitted, and because false witnesses in cases of adultery were to be punished with 80 lashes under Quranic law, Umar ordered the 3 witnesses to be chastised, and this was done. Mughira, happy at his deliverance, became a bit too loud in his expression of indignation at the allegation made against him, and had to be warned by Umar. "Quiet, may Allah silence your voice. By Allah, if the evidence had been complete, I would have had you stoned." After this unsavory episode, Mughira bin Shu'bah was detained at Medina by the Caliph for quite some time. He would later have ample opportunity to earn laurels in war and peace, as a general and administrator, but we shall return to him in due course, and meanwhile follow the fortunes of the new governor of Basra, Abu Musa al-Ash'ari. Some time after the affair of Mughira bin Shu'bah, and this was in the early part of 18 Hijri, that is 639 AD, there was a dispute between Hormuzan and Salma, the commander of the Muslim garrison opposite Ahwaz, regarding the boundary between the land which fell under the treaty and the land taken by the Muslims in war. This boundary could not be clearly defined in the treaty, and Hormuzan sought to take advantage of its vagueness to not honor the terms of the treaty. He refused to cooperate. He had already built up his forces during the few months' respite which he had gained after the treaty, and now hastened to muster more forces, even sending a call to the Kurds who lived in his ancestral district of Mihirjan Qazaf to come to his aid. All this was reported by Salma to Abu Musa, who in turn wrote about it to Umar. The Caliph instructed Abu Musa to take Ahwaz, and Abu Musa marched forth, concentrated his army opposite Ahwaz, and faced the Persian army across the river Karun. There was the usual exchange of emissaries. "Will you cross the river or shall we?" Hormuzan invited Abu Musa to cross to his side. The city for which a battle was about to be fought between the Muslims and the Persians was the capital of the province of Rozistan, a province which was known to the early Muslims as Ahwaz. The province consisted of a flat, hot plain, very fertile and intersected by many rivers and canals. To the north and east, it stretched up to the foothills of the Zagros Mountains. To its west lay Iraq, and in the south its sun-baked shores were washed by the waters of the Persian Gulf. The chief city of the province of Rozistan, or Ahwaz, had once been named Hormuz Shahr, but was known to the Muslims as Souk Ahwaz, that is, Market of Ahwaz, and we shall, for the sake of simplicity, call it just Ahwaz. The most famous thing about it was that it was a city of misers, and it was said that if you lived in Ahwaz for just 1 year, you lost your wisdom. The Muslims crossed the river above the bridge, by the north edge of the city. The Karun is a sizable river and nothing is known of how the Muslims effected its crossing, or of the battle that followed, except that it was a hotly contested one in which the Persians were thoroughly defeated. Hormuzan withdrew from the battlefield with the survivors of his army, and marched in the direction of Ram Hormuz. This happened in about the second quarter of 18 Hijri, possibly the middle of the year. Abu Musa took Ahwaz as a prize of war and gathered a considerable amount of booty, of which the usual 1/5 was sent to Medina. He also took many captives who were mainly local farmers, and these too were distributed among the warriors as slaves. But when Umar came to know about this, he wrote to Abu Musa, "You are not able to farm the land, so free the captives in your possession and impose the tax upon them." The prisoners were freed, but the city and the neighboring countryside were brought under direct Muslim rule. These measures, however, were taken later. The immediate military action launched by Abu Musa after his victory at Ahwaz was a pursuit column under Juz bin Muawiyah, which was ordered to get Hormuzan, and this column caught up with the retreating Persians. Then followed a series of rearguard actions in which Hormuzan skillfully avoided a decisive engagement and extricated his troops from contact every time the Muslims tried to bring on a battle. This mobile action, with retreat and pursuit, continued on the road to Ram Hormuz until the Muslims had occupied Torak, chief city of the district of Surak, some distance from Ram Hormuz. Hormuzan retired east of the river at Yarmouk, where he secured the bridge and turned to face the Muslims once again. He had, however, no intention of fighting a battle if it could be avoided. He sent an emissary to Juz and sued for peace. Juz passed his request on to Abu Musa, who in turn passed it on to Umar, and the Caliph gave orders that the offer of peace be accepted and a fresh treaty be signed. This was done. The Muslims, accustomed to keeping their word in their dealings with other peoples, again fell into Hormuzan's trap believing that he would keep his pledge and unaware that he was merely playing for time until he was strong enough to fight again. However, the district of Surak also came under direct Muslim rule, while the remaining districts of Hormuzan's princedom remained under Muslim suzerainty, though ruled by the Persian prince. It now appeared that peace would prevail. Nu'man bin Muqarrin returned with the Kufans to Kufa. A garrison was established at Dawraq, and the Muslims settled down to ruling their new conquests as part of the province of Basra. End of chapter 16.